Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. This is part of our ongoing series um, where we are looking at issues that impact adolescent health, mental health, and how we organize as a community to best meet everyone's needs. And today, joining me as always is Dr. Vinny Chulani. Hello, Vinny. How are you doing today?
Hey Brad, good to see you again.
We also have with us two special guests from Rising Youth Theater. We have Ty Muhammad and Sarah Sullivan. They're going to be telling you a little bit about what they do. But I guess I want to start, and really it could be for either Ty or Sarah. If you could tell everybody a little bit about what Rising Youth Theater is.
Of course. Hello, hello. Thanks for having us. Rising Youth Theater is a Phoenix-based organization that works and collaborates with youth and adults in a multi-generational space. So our organization really focuses on youth leadership and just like how to like help young people be able to like lean into their own advocacy and their own power, so that we can not just create dope art together, but just so that we can be full humans.
And Sarah, what are some of the ways that communities would see or experience Rising Youth Theater?
Yeah, so we show up in a lot of different spaces. The I think most visible piece of our work is our performances. So we do original plays that are created in collaboration with young people and adults. So all of that work is intergenerational. And we perform in non-traditional spaces. So that ranges from a show we do every year on the light rail and the light rail platform called the Light Rail Plays to we have taken over an empty Kmart space. We've done public parks. And we also have extensive programs that happen in schools. We have camps and classes that happen at our space at the Phoenix Center for the Arts. And we also do extensive work just as a staff team where we have all of our staff and our board has youth and adults in leadership positions. So we are working in extensive collaboration in all of the ways we show up in the world.
I want to let anybody know who's joining us here today. If you have any questions for Ty or Sarah or Vinny or me, you can put them in the chat. But Ty, I want to ask you, what drew you to Rising Youth Theater?
Well, I have to go back to 13-year-old Ty for that question, Brad. I did not have theater in my high school, and I have been doing theater since second grade. So I just kind of had that like drive and that juice to try to do something creative. And because I didn't have those resources in my school specifically, my social studies teacher was dating somebody who worked at the organization at the time. And they recommended that I just like apply for a performance that we do almost every year. Thank you so much. Called the Light Rail Plays. And I, joined as a young person as I believe I was on the design team when I first started. And I just really enjoyed the like collaboration and like the ways in which just like everybody, specifically the adults, saw me as like a collaborator and as like a full artist, even though I didn't really feel like that at the time. Flash forward a little bit, when I graduated high school, they hired me on staff, and the rest is history.
Well, you've both mentioned already a lot of different ways that Rising Youth Theater is elevating the youth voice, is involving them in decision making. But I want to go back to something, Sarah, that you mentioned because Ty picked it up, which is that you perform in alternative, non-traditional spaces. Is that important? You're nodding, but since this is a podcast as well, I'll narrate that for everyone. You're both nodding. So why is it important that you're you're bringing these performances, this art, to non-traditional spaces?
I think that I will, when we first started the organization, a little over 10 years ago, we were performing in theaters. And the work was happening in communities, and it was happening collaboratively. And the work in the room, the process was extremely unique and very meaningful. And then we were performing these plays that we would develop in the community in a theater. And then the people who are coming to see the plays were our friends who did theater. When we did the light rail plays for the first time, we got out of the theater and onto the train platform and the train itself. And suddenly our audience looked really different. And our audience was starting to reflect the community that was actually making the plays as well. And we realized that by like opening the doors and like, taking the roof off, we were able to really explode what, not just how we were making work, but what it looked like and what it felt like and who got to experience it. And it challenged us to think differently about how, not just the why, but the how. So that's been a really important piece of it for us.
Why is it safe to say that traditional art spaces, maybe like traditional organizations, didn't necessarily feel like welcoming or safe places for you? Or am I reading too much into it?
No, you're not reading too much. I think that younger Ty didn't really have the language for it, but literally what you're saying is completely accurate. Like, I personally didn't feel like I saw myself reflected in traditional theater spaces. I felt like that was a space where I would take a more passive role in. And even when I was in a more traditional space, like within school, like I remember at my middle school, we had like a theater program. There was still something like missing for me. And I realized now that it was like that leadership portion of it, of me like taking the accountability for myself and like just like having that space where it's not just the theater director or the theater teacher telling me as the young person like what lines I'm going to learn and what season we're working on, but like being able to advocate and like speak for myself, like, oh, this is what I'm interested in, this is what I would like to see on stage, this is what I would like to talk about.
So Vinny, I know you heard Ty just say that they didn't see themselves in those other spaces. And I know this goes back to something that you care a lot about, which is ensuring that youth see themselves in these organizations that aim to help them succeed. What questions do you have for Sarah and Ty?
Yeah, first of all, I really applaud the work of Rising Youth Theater. We've had the opportunity to collaborate on some projects. And as an art lover myself, as a theater lover myself, it's amazing to see the number of young people I work with who love theater, and it gives me hope for that future generation of patrons, and right, because storytelling can be a powerful, empowering, cathartic experience for young people, but it can also be a vehicle for advocacy. My question is, how did you work as an organization to move from what, there's Hart's ladder of participation. It's like a stair, right? The further up the stair you climb, the more evolved you are in terms of how you truly involve youth and empower youth. At the very bottom rung, there's manipulation. Somewhere there's tokenism, where we invite young people to be present. But right, I always say, because you're invited to the party does not mean to say you get to dance. And as you advance further up in that rung, what process did you follow? And what can those of us who work with young people apply as a way to really sort of live youth empowerment and youth engagement?
I think that I love, first of all, that you're referencing Hart's Ladder, because that's a guiding document for Rising Youth Theater and how we think about our work. And we really try to move in between the top rungs in our different programs and follow those different needs. As an adult working on this team, I think for me, a huge part of it is learning how to thinking about material leadership and what it means to not just make a space for youth voices, but to make a space for youth decision making. And to this idea that it's not actually like my responsibility as an adult in the space to caretake every single thing and make sure that it happens in the right way, which is often my instinct, but to stop and listen and be as much of a learner as I am a teacher in our creative and administrative spaces together. Because I think that a material leadership shift means that we actually have to stop and pause and take the time to learn from each other. And I think that for a lot of us, I think in many industries and certainly in theater and in nonprofits, there's this idea of we need to push to constantly be producing and constantly be making something and like that kind of energy. And I think that our work really shifted as we've learned to slow down and take the time to listen and learn. Because that work is better, but it is slower.
And Ty, what's your experience with that?
Yeah, I think one thing is that like I think it's important to note that I am one of the young people who has like basically grown up with Rising Youth Theater. I'm currently 22. So I am an adult, but I'm like younger adult, still learning how to maneuver the world. And I think like being able to have the space where adults are like, well, what do you want? Is different than like actually like giving us the tools to understand what we want. It's that thing of like, yeah, we might give like all of the details and give all of the context, but do I know that I want to make a performance about X, Y, and Z without fully understanding like the background? So I think that like thing that Sarah was saying about like, it definitely takes a lot more time. One of our collaborators kind of created this like metaphor as we were talking about youth collaboration as like, yeah, there's a specific route to get to from point A to point B. That could be like a 10-minute drive. However, when you work with young people, you got to take that scenic route most oftentimes to like be able to see all of the sites, and all the sites are like understanding like, oh, why do we have like an executive director in an organization? Like, what is that? What's the purpose of that role? The scenic route might mean like specifically like breaking down like, oh, how do you actually format a document? Like it could be like like very big heavy topics or just like those little things. And I think like the ways in which specifically like looking to Hart's Ladder and like having like a model like that to be able to like use as not just like a model that we can like look at, but also language that we all have to be like, oh, right now, I feel like we're on rung 6, which is like a good space to be. However, like there have been times where I felt like I have been on the lower 3 rungs of like manipulation and tokenization, and having those transparent conversations with the adults in the space. And sometimes even like that has happened with me and my like younger peers where I like might have all of the knowledge and I might have like I have that institutional and like organizational knowledge, but I can't always assume that other young people have that same information. So yeah, just finding that cute balance.
And we talk a lot about the mix of tools and trust, that we need to trust each other that the work will get done, that the perspectives that we're bringing into the room are the right ones and we will figure it out together. But we can't just offer that trust without providing the fundamental tools of doing the work, because that's really like a way in which we absent ourselves from the responsibility of what we're making together. So we need to find that balance. And it goes both ways, right? Like we like to say that our mentorship is multi-directional.
You know, we've been mentioning the Hart's Ladder here a lot. And for those people who are listening who aren't familiar with it, Vinny, can you describe what Hart's Ladder is and how to use it?
Yeah, so Hart's ladder is really just a scale that's been developed, and they liken it to a stair. And I think there are about 8 levels, if I'm not mistaken. And at the very and it's HART apostrophe S. And at the very bottom is manipulation, right? Where a youth are in spaces with adults, but there's really just not power sharing, right? And it's really about how you enter into power sharing agreements with the young people, is how I view it. And to bringing in youth, but not necessarily getting their input, to is still having sort of adult-led decisions, and then at the very evolved, at the most, really the spirit, sort of the echelon would be where youth actually initiate decisions in shared spaces with adults, where like it really sort of kind of tips the scale almost of power in the direction of young people.
So we're hearing about Rising Youth Theater, and we're obviously learning about an organization that has worked hard for a long time to integrate and elevate the youth voice. But I imagine that there's some people who are listening to this right now that are hearing about that work. They're hearing, oh, it's going to slow down the work. That's this big process. And they're saying, yeah, I absolutely want more youth feedback, more involvement. But there seems to be what Rising Youth Theater is doing seems to be way off in the distance. So let's put together some first initial steps that an organization can make if they want to start this journey to really empowering the youth with which they work. So what are some tips? Where should they start? Because I have to imagine that there are easier ways to engage youth in leadership and decision making, and there are things that are maybe a little bit more complicated. So if I'm an organization and I want to start on this path, what should I do?
Personally, I think the first step is to check in with the young people that you're either currently working with, or like some people say serving. I think that I put quotes around serving because even that language, that might be the first place to start, is to like analyze the staffing and like seeing how we talk about our young people. Because even like language can be that starting point, and like figuring out like the staffing and how we talk about the language can be an interesting entry point. Because if like I know a lot of organizations that I have like talked to and have like observed, they think that just like hiring young people is the first step and that's how you get started because young people are on the team. However, if you don't create that infrastructure or have those conversations with the people who are already staffed, then like the young person is just being tokenized. They're just being hired just for the purposes of being a young person. So yeah, I think like talking to the young people that you work with and seeing like if that is, because there definitely are going to be young people who are ready to step into that leadership, or young people that you have an idea and have seen like the potential into stepping into that leadership, and just like understanding where they are at is a good place to start. Yeah, that's one of my tips.
But you know, Ty, even in your response there, you talked about there being language that can be kind of off-putting to youth involvement. There definitely are structures, hierarchies. What can you do? What could an organization do to ensure that when they reach out to youth in the way that you suggest, that the youth feel, again, safe in giving their opinions? Because oftentimes these programs that we work in, there's real benefits to youth, and the youth might not want to, upset the people. They might want to not want to jeopardize, what the program is doing. So what do you need to do to make sure that the youth that you're engaging feel safe, so that their participation is genuine?
Yeah, I think like a very tangible example of that is that's something that we do is just creating community agreements together,
Mm,
like for whatever space or conversation we're trying to have. And community agreements are just things that we as an ensemble or as a collective are agreeing upon to ensure that we can come into the space, and not just be make sure that the space is safe for everybody there, but it's also asking them to be brave in that space. That's something that we ask for a lot because, yes, a safe can feel safe. And like even safe is a very loaded word for a lot of bodies. So just like understanding like what safety looks like. Another thing that we did and like took a long time to understand and talk about was what power looks like. And
Yeah,
from understanding power, we can move to power sharing. Um, because all of us hold some sort of power inherently, but it's just understanding where we lie in like in our society, how we show up. Moving from power and into power sharing. I think that's where the most of the juice and the meat of the conversation will be. Because like once everybody in the group has an understanding of what power is and where we lie in or like what kind of power we show up with, then we can understand how to give more power if we're somebody that holds a lot of privilege and how to take quote unquote power. And literally what that means is like what I'm doing right now is just being brave and like actually saying just saying the thing.
yeah. So I have to say, I'm sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I really love how reflective Thai is and like just your use of language, right? But whether it's a creative endeavor or healthcare delivery, I think the principles are cross-cutting. And it's really about beginning with where you are now. And one of the things we really emphasize with the clinics that we work with is begin by asking young people and obtaining surveys is a big key for with our adolescent champion model where we help practices become more adolescent centered. But first, you really have to ask young people. But you'll find, for example, in many of our service areas, when we collect satisfaction surveys, the respondents are parents and caregivers as decision makers, not young people. And I think that's really an easy place for us to start, especially in the health professions and in the sort of the health sector.
Well, that ties into just what I was going to say, which is like in any equity practice, I think that we can often let perfectionism get in the way of getting started. And we want things to be we want to do everything right? So it's just like we can really overthink it and then never actually get to the point where we are opening the door. And I think we can also, in that same lens, start to ask questions that we don't really want to know the answer to. And I think when we're thinking about not just are we asking young people or talking to young people, but are we asking questions and then open to learning from the answer, or are we waiting for a stock response?
there's another bit of research that I want to ask you about because we know that young people are feeling tremendous amount of stress right now. And one of the reasons that they feel stressed is that because the adults in their life, for lack of a better term, aren't behaving like adults. They are giving these young people too much responsibility. They aren't being there for them when they are needed. Again, they're not being adults. When you are working with young people, how do you maintain the role as the adult that the young people can turn to for kind of strength and support while engaging them in participation and honoring their role in the decision making?
Um, I can speak to a very like literal experience of that because I am our summer camp or just like camps in general director. And so that means that I hold a very like specific like role for the young people who I work with in the camp setting. And I think normally with camps, like the director is the one who like has all the information and is the person who you go to when you have questions and like all of those normal stereotypes. And I think something that I both trying to challenge myself and the teachers that work with the young people and the young people directly is that like we are collaborating on something together. So the end result is usually a showcase or like a little performance for the parents at the end of the week. And something that we emphasize with the young people is like, yes, Teacher Ty and all of the teachers are here to like, you know, give you information on how a show is run and how a script is made and how we choose costumes and like all of those things. However, at the end of the day, as soon as like the show starts, it's up to them. And so like starting from the jump and letting them know that like the advocacy, like it's coming from them. And yes, like we as the teachers and the director want the show to be like as polished and beautiful as possible. However, if we aren't getting and giving like that energy from the young people, then the performance is going to be whatever they give. Additionally, like I think something that I do well, and it's kind of weird being reflective about it, so Sarah, I might need you to jump in on what you've like seen me do. But I try very hard to like see every single one of the young people, regardless if they're 4 years old or 12 years old, since our camp programming is usually between those ages. Like they have the most knowledge in whatever we're creating because we're creating it together, and they're the ones who are showcasing that the project or whatever our end culmination thing is. And because that puts the like leadership and the like ownership on them, like that gives them more of that like accountability and that responsibility. And it's not me stepping back and being like, oh, well, you forgot your cue, so the show's gonna be horrible. It's more so being like, what can I do to support you and make sure that you have all the tools that you need? So like just seeing them as a full human, even though they might not see themselves like that yet.
You know, I'm just reflecting, Ty, as you're talking, that what you're describing in what you do with our youngest participants, our campers, is effectively a model of the tools and trust model that we also utilize on our staff team, right? It would not be fair to those campers to just say like, well, sorry, y'all. This is your showcase, so it's going to be what it's going to be. But it is powerful to say, I am giving you the tools that you need. And now you are holding it, but I'm not going anywhere. And that's what I really see you do in those camp spaces. And I think that's kind of a microcosm of how we try to operate for each other. And I think it goes back to this idea that as adults, we have different responsibilities in the space. We have different expertise. We have different accountabilities. And those things are not necessarily lateral, but we don't have a higher level of humanity. We don't have a higher level of expertise or experience because of those additional accountabilities. And I think it's easy to conflate those things.
We are at a time when I want to honor everybody's the half hour that they set aside for us here once a month. But before we go, we kind of glossed over this, and I think this is a nice way to end. What's the benefit of honoring the participants' voice in the program? Why do we do it?
I think it really gets at our shared humanity. I think that if we all, regardless of what age we're coming into the space together, if we can come into our shared spaces by recognizing each other's shared humanity and those intersection points, it has huge benefit for every single person in the space, youth and adults.
I want to thank everybody for joining us. We're going to be back next month with another episode. actually, the Talking About Kids podcast is available every Monday, but these special video webinars are the first Wednesday of every month, and you should be on the mailing list and learning all about it. And special thanks to our guests, Ty Muhammad and Sarah Sullivan. This has been great, guys. Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.